Welcome back, listeners, to the BizBlend podcast. I'm your host, Sana, and today I want to pause on something we don't always put at the center of business conversations: empathy. We talk about strategy, revenue, innovation, technology, transformation, profits, numbers, but we often overlook the very human capacity that fuels all of those things. Listeners, my guest today knows this truth intimately. After walking away from a decades long career as a musician because of unempathic leadership, she has transformed that pain into purpose, writing an Amazon bestseller, delivering a TEDx talk, and helping organizations see empathy not as a soft skill, but as a core driver of productivity, innovation, and profit. So, listeners, this isn't theory. It's personal, it's lived experience, it's data driven, and it's urgently, very, very urgently relevant in the age of AI and big tech. So, let's dive in with our incredible guest, Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. So, Melissa, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I can't wait to talk to you, and I'm so excited to get to talk to your audience as well.
Of course, of course. And Melissa, I think, shout out to the writer, but very rightfully, I mean, there's a big, huge misconception driven around empathy that it's a soft skill. Business is not a place for emotions. So it's like empathy, emotions, it will make you weak. So this has no place for even a conversation or a dialogue in the business circles. And I think that's what we kind of have to unlock, so that through lived experiences, through proven results, through data, it can be proven. It can be translated in the business language as well. So you say, Melissa, you argue that empathy isn't just about being nice, it directly impacts productivity and innovation. So can you walk us through how empathy shows up as a measurable business advantage?
Absolutely, because that is
Mm.
the core of what I talk about. The thing
Mhm.
with empathy that I think people don't realize is that it's not just about feeling. We have this
Mm.
idea that empathy means I feel what you feel, and that's one kind of empathy. But there's actually 43 different kinds of empathy that span 8 categories. The one that's about
Okay.
feelings is only one. So, when you want to start talking leadership and how they can actually use empathy to plug in to hit profit,
Mhm.
productivity, and innovation, that feeling empathy probably isn't the first one they'll go to. They're probably going to use cognitive empathy, which is I logically understand what you're feeling. I know where you're coming from. I just may not feel it. So, when we think about empathy as a whole, we're actually talking about connection and understanding between people. That's what empathy really is. So now if you start to think of it that way, creating connection and understanding with your employees, with your board of directors, with your customers, with all of your stakeholders, now you can start seeing where this is actually going to create inroads into your bottom line. Because Ernst
Mm.
and Young, the big 4 consultancy did a survey in 2022, I think. And they actually look specifically at empathy in the workplace. How does empathy in the workplace affect people? And at the end of that survey, what they discovered was that leaders that can actively use empathy to lead raise their productivity by 87%, their innovation by 86%, and their profit by 84%. So the numbers are there.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
they're out there. They're out there. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, um, and uh, you know, um, so yeah, the numbers are there. But let's say if a skeptical CEO listening to this, uh, you know, they say that okay, the numbers are there, but what's that one metric that you would point out to that makes empathy undeniable?
The way it affects employee attrition. If you wanna look at a single metric that can make or break an organization, that's the one. and it's one that we are really dealing with right now between generational friction, the advent of AI, big tech, big data. We're losing employees. They're going to greener pastures. And according to the Society of Human Resource Management, every employee you lose, it costs 90 to 200% of their wages to replace them. So if you think about human connection, just to make sure that you limit that employee attrition, that'll go right back into your bottom line in huge amounts. Another one that people tend to not think about a lot is communication. But according to the
Mm.
Grammarly-Harris State of Business Communication Report, we in the United States lose 1.2 trillion with a T dollars per year to bad communication.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're connecting with your people and you're creating quality communication, can you imagine how that feeds back into that bottom line?
Sure. I mean, if the logic can't make sense, then the numbers absolutely do.
Yeah, they're there. I mean, you'd think that you couldn't necessarily, quantify and put numbers to something like empathy, but you really can. These soft skills drive hard results.
Yeah. I love that line, Melissa. I love that line. Soft skill will drive the hard results. Ah, and um, yeah, and this is, I think, such such an interesting aspect, for especially leaders who hear the word empathy and the instant connection is that, oh, it slows things down. But the way you put the data and the way you put it across, I think it really suggests it actually accelerates outcomes, which is definitely absolutely crucial and a powerful shift. And that was specifically in today's modern age.
Absolutely. I mean, at the very least, by creating that connection and understanding with employees, you're also building goodwill, you're building
Mm.
morale, and you're building loyalty. Now you have people that want to help you with your goal. They want to buy into your vision. It's going to accelerate what you're doing within your business because you have people that are working with you, not because they have to, not because they're getting a paycheck, but because they want to.
Right? Right. So now, Melissa, let's move on to your lived experiences. You had to leave a career you loved because of unempathic leadership. If we can, maybe give like a glimpse or like a trailer of that, and how did that personal experience change the way you now talk to leaders about the cost of ignoring empathy?
Sure. So I was a performing musician for
Mm-hmm.
most of my life. I played French horn, I played in orchestras. I loved it.
Wow.
I mean, yeah, I mean, talk about living the dream. I got to do all sorts of things. I wouldn't have been able to meet people, like Ray Charles. I would never have met him in my in my normal life without doing it.
Yeah.
He is not in my circle. But the thing with being a gigging musician, even a high level one, is that, you don't have benefits and it's not always stable. And so I got my first doctorate and went to a university to teach. I was a professor. And within my first term, I was assaulted by one of my colleagues. And even though that was horrific, the hard part came after that when I kept trying to talk to people within this organization and say, "Look, this can't happen. This guy is hurting people. It wasn't just me." People that do that, they don't do it once. They do it over and over. But
Yeah, right.
m my boss didn't wanna hear me. I mean, when I talked to him, he said as junior female faculty, if I was stirring up trouble in my first term, I wasn't ever gonna get promoted. When I talked to his boss, I was told that if I didn't like it, I should just leave. I went to the ombudsman, I went to the union, I went to HR, I went to everybody that I thought could help me, and the
Mhm.
system was so broken and so unempathic that they couldn't hear what I was trying to say, and it finally was such a strain on my mental health that I had to walk away. knowing full well that I probably wasn't going to get another French horn professorship. I mean, I'll ask people, "How many French horn professors have you known?" Probably none. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
there's not a lot of jobs out there for that.
Mhm. Yeah.
So so I ended up leaving, and I
Mm,
kinda spun out for a while because I just didn't know what else to do, but I kept coming back to the what had happened. What was it that was so broken that it would drive people out? And I mean, I watched my colleagues leave. I watched other faculty members leave. The whole system was just a mess, and it kept bringing me back around to there wasn't connection, there wasn't understanding. What is it that would create connection? What is it that would create understanding? And that's how I started getting into the empathy side of things, because it's one thing to understand what had happened, but it's another to
mhm,
try and figure out, well, what could have changed it? What is it that was missing that maybe people could have learned or could have worked with to be able to fix this system?
mm.
So so that's how I
Wow.
got from there to here.
Yeah, yeah. I think the beginning uh, had to be, really turbulent for this beautiful journey to be embarked upon, Melissa, for you. I'm just trying to fluff out the things, but it's really disheartening. And we see so many examples like that, and sometimes in workplaces we see um, and this is from our observations. I mean, people um they shout, they they literally shout at their um team members, and even if let's say an individual, they are a great performer, but they have a really bad attitude going on there. But it's this kind of very kind of assume that he's sorry, they are going to be retained just because they're giving the results. It doesn't matter if they have a bad attitude or they're behaving bad with their other colleagues or their peers or anyone out there. And
Yeah,
it's like level by level, you know.
yeah.
This just
It really is.
yeah. Great, great. Melissa, thank you so much, first of all, for sharing that. And with this, first of all, of course, stories like yours, they hit different because they're not just numbers or statistics on slide. They are lived consequences, and that's where change usually begins. And do you find, Melissa, that leaders are more receptive when you share that story versus only the data? I mean, what exactly makes a difference out there?
I feel like they really want a combination of both. I
Okay.
mean, I use my story because I think it really shows, number 1, just how broken an entire system can be. Because when you're in that system, sometimes you don't see it anymore, you know? And this realization that it's the whole machine is broken, I think is important. But the other part of it is it actually shows what happens to someone who is a high achiever, who
Yeah.
really wants to do well, is very ambitious, and yet how it can just beat them down until they say, "I give up. I'm out." You know, and I think leaders need to hear that. It tends to make them uncomfortable, but usually we have to be uncomfortable before we do change. So, my goal isn't to make anybody uncomfortable, but it is to shine a light on the things that we tend to not like to talk about. And then when I can actually back that up with data and say, "Look, this is what happens if you don't do it well, but this is what happens if you do it well." That it's kind of a 1-2 punch.
I love that. I love that. And do you believe that this also needs a great deal of accountability? Because we it's very rare that somebody who is at a senior position or is a leader, they accept their mistakes, especially if they're not uh, if they're seeing growing attrition rate or dissatisfied employees talking about how just bad it is, or maybe not good communication. Did you feel that this really requires a great deal of accountability, like a personality shift, or is just a mindset shift that they need to have?
Yes, I tend to call it self-awareness, but I think either way, it's kind of the same thing. It's not
Okay.
something that, you can just say, "Well, I can hire somebody else to fix this for me," because it's not going to happen. If people aren't aware of what their actions are doing to other people, if they aren't
Mhm.
accountable for their actions that they're doing to other people, then it doesn't change. This is where I actually start talking about culture and how culture really drips
Mhm.
down from the top. And if as a leader, this is the kind of culture you want, an empathic culture, then you have to be willing to step up and show people how to do it. Because whether leaders like to know this or not, as a leader, you are always on stage. Someone is always watching. And if you actually lead with empathy so that others are watching and they start to see, oh, this is how we do things, pretty soon you instill that culture. Because one of the really beautiful things about empathy is that when it's working well, it works in both directions. So as you're
Mhm.
giving empathy to someone, they're going to be more likely to return that to you. And pretty soon that culture starts to marinate.
Mm, very well put. Very well put, Nurse. Um, and now the next one, I think this is such an especially in today's age of where now we're talking about AI. It's already mimicking, uh, you know, the day-to-day operations and activities. Now, you speak about EQ or emotional intelligence being a non-negotiable in today's global climate, which I absolutely, I mean, if there could have been a percentage above 100, like 500 or maybe 1,000, I agree with that. But let's also bring in AI into this. Do you think AI tools can ever simulate empathy, or is this one domain where humans will always have the upper hand?
No, I don't believe AI ever can because AI is about or AI, empathy is about connection and understanding. And AI can't connect and it doesn't really understand what it is to be human. That's why it'll do weird things. It'll, do create pictures with, like, 3 arms, or when it's
Yeah.
writing, it'll come up with stuff that makes no sense. And we're finding this in business now, where they were trying to actually use it for, therapy, for health reasons, and it was actually taking people that were mentally unstable and making it worse because they couldn't connect and it couldn't understand. So until we invent an AI that can actually connect human to human, which I don't believe it ever will, then we won't have empathy. Now, the problem is that AI can mimic empathy. It can look like it has empathy. And the scary part is that it can mimic empathy in a way that it looks more like empathy than the empathy that we give human to human. And I think that says a lot more about
Wow.
us as human beings than it does about AI.
Wow. And I think this particular aspect it will take hours and hours to discuss about. This is something that is so important to talk about uh, because the heart of empathy is connection, and I think that's still something we as humans can never outsource. Can never outsource. Um,
Yes.
that's a beautiful observation. I think it's a beautiful takeaway for our listeners as well, especially for leaders or founders, who would actually maybe not now, maybe in future consider AI, kind of that empathic human in there, that manager in there. And now I would like to bring a bit of nuance in here. Now, um, there's another side of the discussion around empathy that too much of it makes leaders indecisive or overly accommodating. Uh, it's like you cannot be completely emotional, or sometimes you have to be very aggressive and very clear-headed, rational, logical in making those decisions. Once again, they say about feelings. What do you say to people who argue that empathy could actually weaken leadership?
That empathy is not all about feelings. That's when I talk about how there's more than one kind, and the one that leaders should lean into is what's called cognitive empathy. And that means that I logically understand what you're feeling. I just don't feel anything. Because it's not empathy if we feel for everybody until we end up burnt out. That's not the best thing we can
Mhm.
do for our leaders. You know, if they're going to be our best leaders, they do have to be clear-headed. They do have to be able to think for these groups, and sometimes they have to make decisions that are gonna be hard. That's
Mhm.
business. That's the way it is, you know? But that doesn't mean you have to feel deeply for everything. You know, cognitive empathy is very useful when you're dealing with groups because you can keep that clear head and keep that idea that, you know, the business has to run and still make the decisions that are going to be through connection and understanding of your people. Make the best decisions possible. One differentiation I like to make is that
Mhm.
empathy is always kind, but it's not always nice. Nice
Mm.
is a social construct. It's what we do to get by in society easier. It's like having manners. You know, it's nice, but you don't have to have it. Kindness is a true understanding and desire to help other people and be on board with other people. Empathy isn't always nice, but it's always kind.
Mm. It's something like, people pleasing or um, um, I may be, like constructive criticism, a constructive feedback, but in a
Yeah.
very kind way.
Yes. But if, you know, if being nice is not to rock the boat so that you wouldn't give that criticism, well, maybe that's nice, but it's not very kind because you're robbing that person of the chance to have
Mm.
that feedback and to grow and to do more and be better. So you haven't
Mhm.
actually done them any favors. You're not actually showing them empathy. You're just being nice to avoid conflict.
Right. Yes, exactly. I think this is a very, very important differentiation there. Very important differentiation there.
Yeah.
Super, super. So Melissa, before we wrap up, I mean, this is a ritual. So, of course, if our listeners they would like to connect with you, and especially all the leaders, all the entrepreneurs who are listening to this conversation, they would like to connect with you. What would be the best way?
So you can catch me at my website, which is EQ which is V and as in Victor, IA, empathy. And right now, if you go and you sign up for my newsletter, I'm actually giving away a free chapter of my book so that
Wow.
people can kind of see what it's about. And yeah, because I want this word out far and wide. I want as many people to read this as wants to read it. So you
Nice.
could catch that there. And I'm also on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and I have a podcast called The Empathic Leader. And then, of course, my book, which is out right now, and as of this weekend, we got bestseller in 4 countries: the US,
Wow.
Canada, UK, and Australia. So,
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Congratulations. Congratulations, Melissa. And
thank you.
yes, I'll make sure to have all the links, the details in the show notes. And um, I really, really, you know, I also really believe that the word needs to get wider and wider because there are a lot of misconceptions around this word empathy or when we talk about emotional intelligence or EQ. But the good part is that as we advance more and more towards the digital age, I think people with empathy, um, that cognitive empathy, they'll really, really make a mark in there. So thank you so much, Melissa, for bringing this into the limelight and sharing your story, your lived experiences with us, and for becoming this beacon of light. So thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you to you and your audience, and this really was a treat.
Thank you, Melissa. And to all the listeners out there, if I just could summarize, I think this conversation, it reminds us that leadership isn't just about making tough calls. It is about making human calls. Empathy isn't a weakness and it isn't fluff. It isn't nice. It is a strategic advantage rooted in humanity. So, the next time you are leading a meeting, handling a conflict, or even just checking in with your team, ask yourself not just what needs to get done, but how do people in this moment feel? Because that simple pause can shift everything. With this, thank you to everyone for tuning into this episode of BizBlend. And keep leading with empathy, keep blending business with humanity, and I'll see you on the next episode of BizBlend. Thank you.